When Noah proudly stood in front of his class and said, "My dad works at NASA," he expected the wide-eyed awe he usually saw when he talked about space, but instead, there was laughter sparked not by curiosity but by disbelief, and it was his own teacher, Miss Carter, who scoffed and said, "Noah, it's not okay to make up stories to impress people," brushing off his words in front of everyone, and in that moment, the light in Noah's eyes dimmed, his voice shrank, and the excitement that once filled his heart about his father's work turned into embarrassment, and though he said nothing more that day, that evening, he sat at the kitchen table, silent, poking at his food until his father, Michael, a soft-spoken but brilliant NASA flight systems engineer, noticed something was wrong, and when Noah finally shared what had happened, Michael didn't react with anger, didn't storm off to the school or write angry emails, but simply placed a hand on his son's shoulder and said, "We'll let the truth speak for itself," and waited quietly for the upcoming parents' night. When the evening arrived, Michael walked into the classroom in simple clothes, no badges, no fanfare, just a calm presence and a folder tucked under his arm, and as he approached Miss Carter, she greeted him politely until he introduced himself as Noah's father, and in that moment, her expression changed, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face, especially when he said gently, "I heard there was some confusion about my son's truth," and he opened the folder to reveal a photo of himself standing beside the Artemis II spacecraft, another of him giving a presentation at Johnson Space Center, and an official letter on NASA letterhead confirming his current role, and Miss Carter stood there speechless, color draining from her face as the weight of her earlier dismissal settled in, but Michael didn't shame her. Instead, he smiled and said, "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next," and before she could fully apologize, he asked if he might say a few words to the class, which she agreed to with a silent nod. When Michael stood before the children the next day, wearing his actual NASA badge and holding a model of the Orion spacecraft, the class fell silent in awe, but he didn't begin by talking about rockets or stars. Instead, he talked about honesty, about how easy it is for adults to overlook children's truths, and how painful that can be. He shared his own struggles, how people doubted him when he said he wanted to work for NASA, how he failed his first calculus exam in college and was told by a professor he wasn't cut out for engineering, and how he worked night shifts at a diner while studying orbital mechanics by flashlight in the back room, and then he told them about Noah, not as his son, but as the boy who never stopped believing in him, even when the world doubted him, and when he finished, the class burst into applause. And Ms. Carter stood up with tears in her eyes and said, "I was wrong, Noah. And I'm so proud of you, for your honesty, and for your heart," and from that day forward, everything changed. Noah became the most admired student in the room, not because of his father's job, but because he had stood for his truth with quiet courage, and Miss Carter, now more aware than ever of the power her words held, became an even better teacher, one who listened first and judged later. Years passed, and Noah's love for space only grew stronger. He studied astrophysics, interned at NASA himself, and eventually was selected for astronaut training, and on the day of his first mission into space, standing tall in his flight suit on the launch pad, he looked out into the crowd and spotted his father, still calm, still proud, and right beside him, older, grayer, but unmistakably emotional, stood Ms. Carter, retired now, eyes glistening with tears as the countdown began. And as the rocket lifted off and Noah soared into the stars, she whispered, "He wasn't lying, he was just dreaming." And in that moment, surrounded by cheering crowds and roaring engines, she understood something that would stay with her forever: never doubt a child's dreams, because sometimes, they're not just telling stories, they're telling you exactly who they're becoming.